Extraordinary Conference. We are so excited to have you here as we continue to learn and to grow and to become extraordinary together. I am joined right now by our great friend, Kathleen Clemons. Kathleen, how are you?
I am wonderful, and I'm so excited about this conference.
Yes, so are we. And we're so excited to have you here as we take adventures into understanding and learning and growing with Lensbaby. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and how you became a Lensbaby photographer?
Sure. I started shooting in 2003, 2004, and discovered Lensbaby in 2005. And around that time, I started photographing primarily flowers, fell in love with them, and using Lensbaby to shoot them changed the way I shoot and really let me show the world the way I see it. So excited to share some of that today.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And often as photographers, I always come to this idea that our pictures tell stories for us. And you do that in such a beautiful way through flowers. Can you tell everyone who's watching who may not know what to expect as they get into your course here this morning?
Sure. I'm going to start off with my start in Lensbaby photography, and then I'm going to move on to my journey with the Lensbaby velvets specifically and how I use them, what I use the different velvets for, what situation, what flowers, and then hopefully at the end I will, I'm going to come up with some of my most frequently asked questions, which hopefully will answer any questions that you guys have about it. If not, I'll be happy to answer your questions afterwards.
That's amazing. We're super excited and can't wait. Shoot Extraordinary Conference. Don't forget, follow us on Instagram at Lensbaby USA. Tell all your friends we're going live, and it's time to learn a little bit more. We'll see you guys in the classroom.
This is Kathleen Clemons. So in an ideal world, I would be coming to you from a beautiful garden on a lovely cloudy day filled with flowers, but this is December. I live in Maine and we have a pandemic going on. So I will instead show you how I use the velvets in this format. So I'll tell you a little bit about my journey with Lensbaby in general and about each of the velvets and how I use them, and I will hopefully answer some of your questions about Lensbaby velvet lenses. So let's get started. So my introduction to Lensbaby was in 2005, and the first Lensbaby I owned was the 2.0. It was one of the bellows models where you squeezed the lens in order to focus. It's a picture of me in 2005 with the teleconverter on my Lensbaby 2.0. Aperture was controlled with small rubber rings that you put right into the lens, and that's how I got my start, and I immediately fell in love with the selective focus and blur that this lens provided. So these are the three first lenses. There was the original Lensbaby, the 2.0, and then the Lensbaby 3G, which to this day has always been my least favorite model of Lensbaby. So here are some images from my very first day with my Lensbaby 2.0, fresh out of the box. I received the lens in November, put it right on my camera, it went for a walk around the block. Subject matter was limited, but there were some drying hydrangeas in the neighborhood. So if you look at these, is my focus great? No. It really wasn't. It's not bad in the image on the left, but even though I didn't feel like I mastered the lens, certainly right out of the box, there was something here that I absolutely loved, the bokeh, the blur, and I fell in love with my Lensbaby that very first day. So I kept working, trying to get some focus. I got a little better. I also learned how to use the blur when I really didn't need anything in focus, like the image on the left, and how to get that sharp selective focus in the feather shot. So the more I worked, the easier it got. So then Lensbaby came up with the optic swap system, where you would buy one lens, which is really a holder, and you could swap in and out different optics with different effects, different focal lengths. Okay, and I fell in love with those. It was a lot easier to change the aperture. Didn't have to drop in discs anymore because the apertures are right on the optics themselves. Worked hard, mastered those. So I really feel that using a Lensbaby has allowed me to show the world how I see it. And using these lenses have helped me to find my voice as an artist. And then in 2005, Lensbaby came out with the first velvet. Right now there are 3 velvets. In April of 2005 was the Velvet 56, June 2017 the Velvet 85, and last April 2020 the Velvet 28. So I was lucky enough to be able to beta test the Lensbaby Velvet 56. So let's talk about a few things that you need to know about velvet lenses. These lenses are fully manual. There's no auto anything, no autofocus, no auto anything at all. You can shoot them on either manual or aperture priority. I'm usually using aperture priority for flowers. The aperture will be selected right on the lens, not in your camera. So there will not be any aperture or lens info in the EXIF data. You'll be able to see the ISO and the shutter speed, but you will not be able to see your aperture or what lens you used. What you see is what you get in focus, and by that I mean with a straight lens, in order to see how much is going to be in focus, you have to push your depth of field preview button. With a Lensbaby, what you're looking at, what you're seeing in your viewfinder is what is going to be in focus. Now you need to be sure that your camera's diopter is set correctly for your vision. If you're new to manual focus, if you're used to using autofocus and you have not set your camera's diopter, check your manual. It's very, very simple to do. So the Velvet 56 is a 56 millimeter f1.6 lens. You can see right in this photo that the apertures are on that lower dial. Okay. The minimum focus distance of this lens is 5 inches, and again, it's a fully manual lens. So this is the shot that made me fall in love with my Velvet 56. I was beta testing and it was winter, I believe, and I'd bought myself a bouquet of of pink daisies, and I was, shooting along, and then I stopped and looked at the back of my camera, and when I saw this shot, I started to cry because the way I see flowers was on that LCD. I could see that on the back of the camera. The way I see was in that photo. And I also knew at that moment that some of my best work was ahead of me, and that was a really, really powerful, emotional moment for me. So of course I worked my subject. Here are some more shots from that very first shoot with the Velvet 56. The Velvet 56 provides a beautiful, soft, ethereal glow across the image. It's not selective, it's across the image. And you control how much of that glow with your aperture. Okay, so let's look at some same subject at different apertures to see that glow. So this is wide open at f1.8. You can see how strong that glow is. Really not seeing any natural texture. The lines are all very soft. At f2, you're starting to get a little more definition. Nothing I would call sharpness, but more definition, a little less glow. At f2.8, a little bit more. The lines are a little stronger now. At f4, you can see most of the glow is more to the outer edges, and there's more definition in my subject. At f5.6, the depth of field is deeper, less glow. All right, as you stop down. Now, I don't shoot at these apertures very often, but I will show you some examples of when a small aperture makes sense. And at f16, all right, just around the outer edges, deeper depth of field. Here's another couple of examples of the same subject. A calla lily at f2, look at the strong diffused glow around the edges. Okay, the edges are kind of blending right into my background here. If you look at f4, there's more definition, a little bit less of a glow. So as you stop down, that soft, dreamy look will be a little less, a little less, a little less. Okay, here's 2 more examples at f2, and at f4. Okay, you can see that the lines are a lot stronger at f4, starting to lose that glow a little bit. This is at f4 as well, starting to get a little bit of petal texture now. So you can go soft with this lens, or a little soft, or more detail. You know, it's a really, really versatile lens. This is at f11. This dahlia had a lot of depth to it, and by that I mean petals that were coming out of the flower toward me. That's a lot of depth. I would have ended up with blurry distractions if I had not stopped down to a small aperture. And you can see there's still softness around the edges here at f11. All right, this is at f8. I needed to get some strong detail in the center and then softer toward the edges. So you can really see how versatile this lens is. This is at f11 straight out of the camera, which is another thing that I love about my Lensbaby velvets. All my Lensbaby lenses really is that they need very little, if any, post-processing. Okay? And a soft version. So, you know, how much of that glow is going to be in your image is totally up to you, and you will choose different apertures for that. And it's not just for flowers. This is wide open. Okay, you can see it makes a beautiful, very dreamy look. And this is my Cat Calla at f5.6. So again, certainly not only for flowers. Then Lensbaby came out with the Velvet 85. Okay, this has a minimum focus distance of 9.5 inches away, and again, fully manual. So the minimum focus at 9.5 inches might sound like a lot, but it's a longer lens. All right, so here's that lens at f2.5. Again, very soft, very dreamy. You're not really seeing strong petal edges. And at f4, see the difference. I'm starting to get petal texture. I'm getting petal edges in focus. All right, and you can go from really, really soft and dreamy, wide open, to more definition at f4. Just like the Velvet 56. Here's f5.6. This flower has a very detailed center, so I stopped down more. And again, at f11, this flower had all those tiny water drops. I certainly wouldn't want to make those just blurred. Okay? Very versatile lens, depending on what you, the artist, wants to show in the flower. Do you want it very soft and dreamy? Do you want that detail? You can get all of that with just one lens. Right? You can see here that you start to get more and more detail, more texture as you stop down, just like with the Velvet 56. Okay? And again, not always for flowers. You can shoot street scenes with it. I happened upon this gorgeous dancer in downtown Charleston, and if you look closely, you will see that the blur is around the outer edges. Look at her foot down at the bottom, but I could still get the detail I needed in her. Okay, this is wide open, so if you really, really want to go soft and dreamy with a landscape, you certainly can with this lens. And then last spring, the Velvet 28. So this one is 28 millimeters. It's an f2.5 lens, and the minimum focus distance is 2 inches away, which is pretty darn cool. Okay, so I can get right up next to my subjects now if I want, or I can pull further back. It's great for really large flowers when I want to include a lot of background in my subjects, but more often than not, I'm thinking Velvet 28 when I want to get in super close. All right, a couple of more examples from that lens. Again, not just for flowers, feathers, shells, landscapes. I really love having the Velvet 28 in my bag because if I want to stop down, I can have just a regular wide-angle lens. This is the Portland headlight, or I can choose to open the lens up for a soft, dreamy look. Same thing in this situation. Do I want to make a very dreamy, ghostly image, or I really want to pull out sharp detail? Those are artistic choices that I get to make with one lens. So here are some tips for getting started with a velvet lens. Put it on your camera and leave it there, okay? At least for a week, if not for several weeks. That will make you really use the lens. Experiment with aperture, okay? Focus is going to be easiest at f4 and f5.6 in the beginning. That soft diffused glow, wide open or close to it, might make it tough for you to focus. Watch your exposures. When you are using a manual lens, get used to checking the back of your camera or your histogram when you're using it. So if things are too dark in your viewfinder focus, when you're focusing using a small aperture, let's say you're using f8, f11, all right? Change the aperture to f4, set your focus, and then you can change the aperture back to the small aperture. Setting it at f4 will let more light in, will make it easier for you to focus, right? That's a little tip for that. So if you find using this lens that you are struggling with focus, here are a few tips. I want you to check to be sure that your camera's diopter is set correctly for your vision. If you are hand holding, do you have a good fast shutter speed? Don't try and hold these lenses at a 1/15 of a second. Ask yourself and be really honest here. Are you steady enough to hand hold, or should you be on a tripod? I think that's an individual decision that we all need to make. Could you be closer than the lens can focus? Okay, let's say you have the Velvet 56 and you're trying to get 4 inches away from your subject. The lens cannot focus at 4 inches. The minimum focus distance of that lens is 5 inches. It is really, really important for you to learn what the minimum focus distance is for each of your lenses, all right? Again, if you're having trouble focusing, try a smaller aperture for a little bit less glow and more subject definition, all right? I'm not saying sharpness, I'm saying definition, all right? So let's go over some questions that I get asked a lot about the velvets. So Kathleen, how do you choose which velvet to use? All right, so the main differences between the three are focal length and the minimum focus distance. So sometimes the choice is really obvious, okay? And other times I'll shoot a subject with several different lenses, several different velvets even. So, you know, I'll ask myself and look at the flower and how close do I need to get, or how close can I get? Okay, how large is my subject? Am I including background? Do I need the compression that longer focal length of the 85 can provide? And are there distracting elements that will be included if I choose a wider lens, like the 28? So let's look at those individually. So here's a setup in my studio with the Velvet 56 and a printed textured background that is 11 by 17 in the background. So at the Velvet 56, if I move in close to my subject, that lens is too wide. I cannot fill the background with that printed image. But if I switch to the Velvet 85, that longer focal length allows me to fill that frame with that background. So a longer focal length sort of brings the background forward. It's the lens compression of a longer focal length. So if I have this sort of a situation, I'll reach for the Velvet 85, okay? I'll also reach for the Velvet 85 if there's a beautiful background that I want to include, but I want to be sure it's well blurred. That longer focal length will provide better background blur. So let's say I need to get in closer, but not super wide. I don't want to get into just the center of this flower. Then I'd probably choose the Velvet 56. If I want to move in super close or go really wide, then I would think Velvet 28. Okay? And sometimes I shoot with all three of them. This is some milkweed I shot really early in the morning last week. I did some with the Velvet 28. I did some with the Velvet 56. And I did some with the Velvet 85. And I love them all. Okay? Here is the same flower with the Velvet 85, the Velvet 56, and the Velvet 28. My point here is don't get too hung up on which velvet to use when. Choose one, use it and see what you can do with it. Okay, these are extremely versatile lenses. I just don't want you to get hung up on which one, and that is the question that I get most often. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes I'll just start shooting with whatever lens was still on my camera from the last time I used it. All right, so don't worry too much about which lens to use. Here's another question that I get asked a lot. Do you have a favorite Lensbaby Velvet? Well, I do, and it's the Velvet 85. That longer focal length is really, really wonderful for shooting flowers, and that's what I photograph most often. You know, if I'm going to include background, I know that it will be well blurred. And again, no post-processing. These are straight out of my camera. With that Velvet 85, I can easily fill the frame with my subject. I also love the Velvet 85 for portraits. This is my granddaughter Madison. The shot on the left was with the Velvet 85 at 2.8. The shot on the right was f4. I had such a ball shooting her with this lens. I did a whole bunch of the different faces of Madison Harper. It's a beautiful, beautiful lens for portraits. Again, here's two more with that f5.6, the image on the left of my daughter-in-law and granddaughter, and my two granddaughters on the right. That was at f4. You can see that even at f4 with a portrait, can you see that subtle glow? It's just so beautiful for people. And I wouldn't shoot people with a 28mm lens, probably not as much with a 56. The 85 is beautiful for portraits, and I can go really soft and blurry if I want, with more of a glow, or I can get more detail. So Kathleen, how do you tell which lens you used, since it's not going to be in the EXIF data? Get that question a lot too. This is my method. It's very simple. Before I start shooting with the lens, I take a photo of it with whatever lens is on my camera. And then when I look through my images, I can see that I'll see the picture of, as in this case, the Sweet 50, and I know that all the images after that were shot with my Sweet 50. And then I'll see another lens, and I'll know that from that point on, all of the next images are shot with that lens. It's a really, really simple way to do it. You could also take a 3x5 card. You could write the names of your different Lensbabies on it and take a picture of the word, the Velvet 56 or Sweet 50, but I just take a picture of the lens and it works really well for me. So you can see how I used it here. This is when I was out shooting the milkweed, and every time I changed lenses, took a picture of the lens. So I know that all the images after that until the next lens are with that lens. Works really, really well. Now the question I get asked often is, what apertures do you use most with your velvets? So the three apertures that I use most often are, that's a typo, it's f2.8, f4, and f5.6. At f2.8, I've lost a little bit of the glow, but I have more definition in the lines of my subject. And flowers are all about line, shape, color, and texture. Okay, at f4 I start to get a little more texture, and again at f5.6, but at 2.8 there's still what I consider to be a beautiful ethereal look to the images, but the glow is just not quite as strong. The lines stand out more, and I think that's important for flower photography. So here are a couple at f2.8. You can see that there is still a soft glow, but I have good lines. Okay, at f4, more detail, and now, as I said, you start to see the petal texture coming alive. And f5.6, for when I need to go deeper, I have a flower that has more depth, that has more detail. I'll move to f5.6. But, as I said, sometimes I go even smaller to f11, and sometimes wide open. Sometimes I really want just that soft, beautiful, ethereal glow. Totally up to me what effect I'm going to get with that same lens. So another question I get, are there times you do not use a Lensbaby? Yes, and let me tell you specifically what those are. So if I'm shooting in a public garden, let's say a water garden, and the flowers are not planted near the edge and they're far away and I certainly can't go into the pond, I'll use something with a longer focal length, most often my Canon 180 millimeter, right, for those times. Mostly either flowers that are water flowers or flowers in a public garden that I cannot get up close to. I don't crop my images, so I need to get that composition at the time of the shoot. And if I'm not in a place where I can really get close to my subjects, then I'll choose a longer focal length. Same here. If I'm shooting landscapes and they're a good distance away, then I'm going to use a longer lens. Also, if I'm doing the shooting through technique where I put my lens right up close to my subject, wide open, and create an ethereal blur of color in the foreground. And as soon as Lensbaby comes up with a 180 millimeter, I can put my Canon away and use all Lensbabies. That's just a subtle hint, Craig. A Lensbaby with a really long focal length would be just a joy to me. So another question I get is, when do you choose to use the Composer Pro and your Sweet 50? People know that's a favorite for me, or any of the other optics instead of a Velvet. Okay, this is a shot with the Sweet 50 right here, and if you really look at this, you can see that there's an area of sharp focus surrounded by blur. That's not the same effect as the Velvet. The Velvet effect is more across the frame. It's not selective. You're not going to have a tack sharp area in sharp focus surrounded by blur. It's a really different look. So here's the same subject, the one on the left, Sweet 50 with a +4 macro diopter at f4. So you can see the center and the petals over to the left, slightly off center, are tack sharp and they're surrounded by blur. There's also distortion in the background and some directionality in that blur when I bend the lens. Now the image on the right is the Velvet 85 at f2.8. Can you see that there's a soft diffused glow overlying that sharp detail, but it's an all-over effect. It's not selective. Okay? Here's a couple of more examples. Sweet 50 is on the left. You've got your sharp area in focus fading off to blur, so that area is surrounded by blur, and the Velvet 85 at f4 is more of an all-over effect. Okay, I hope that shows you the difference. And then of course with the Velvet 85 you could go for an all-over glow for a totally different look. Okay, this is the Sweet 50 at 2.8, small area in focus, the rest goes to blur. So it depends on the effect that I'm going for. These are also with the Sweet 50 at f2. I like to use f2 with the Sweet 50 often because I really love to sort of dance on the edge of seeing how little I can have in focus, get away with that, but yet still tell the story that I want to tell about my subject. So that's the difference for me as to when I'll use a Velvet and when I'll use one of these Sweets. Okay, here's another example. This is a Sweet 50 at f2.8, sharp area in focus surrounded by blur. So hopefully that shows you the difference and you will be able to see that in your own work. One more example, you can see the strong blur, yet a sharp area of focus. All right, so we're going to move on to your questions now. I hope this has really shown you how I use the Velvets and how I've developed using the Velvets, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Dreamy artistic images.
Emotive and soulful imagery.
That extra dimension and quirkiness.
Really unique images.
Se olvidaron completamente.
Extraordinary results.
Creamy bokeh and a dreamy feel.
Creative and quirky landscapes.
Unique blur effect.
Fun flares.
Poetic, oniric look.
Something extraordinary.